Hello and welcome to the Sociology Show podcast. Would you like to start by telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do, please?
Hello, everyone. My name is Professor Simon Winlow. I am a Professor of Social Sciences at Northumbria University.
Thank you very much, Simon. And we're going to talk about your study, which my students just know as the bouncer study. We just want to find out a little bit more about the research. Very famous piece of research. So, do you mind telling us about how it all started to begin with? A little bit of background about the study.
Sure. Well, in the dim and distant history, I the first in my family to head off to university and went to Durham University, which was then very posh and is still quite posh, and hated it really. Didn't enjoy it at all. Didn't fit in. Took every opportunity that I could do to get back home to environments that seemed a little bit more comfortable to me. But during the process of doing my sociology degree at Durham, I encountered Professor Dick Hobbs, who's one of my lecturers there, and we got on well. And he obviously saw something in me and encouraged me, which was very good of him. And I made it through my degree amazingly and started a PhD that he supervised. So I started to look at a world I knew quite well, which was the world of illegal trading. So I was interested in professional criminals who were buying and selling stolen goods. The drug markets at the time were absolutely exploding as rave music took hold. Nightclubs were springing up all over the place, and the nighttime economy was growing incredibly quickly. And so, how the bouncer stuff started specifically? Dick got a grant from the economic ESRC, which is the Economic Social Research Council, along with Steve Hall, to investigate bouncers specifically. And he kind of tagged me onto the bid. I was appointed as a research assistant, and he said, "Can you extend your study into the world of bouncers?" Which I could. I knew that friends of mine were involved in that work, and that's how it all got going. I worked alongside Stuart Lister, who's currently at University of Leeds, and Phil Hadfield, who's no longer an academic, and we kind of divvied up the research. And Stuart and Phil did, various interviews that went in the Bouncers book, and I did the participant observation stuff.
Great. So what was the, I'll come on to that bit because that's really interesting. What was the kind of overall aim or hypothesis of the study? What was it you were trying to identify?
Well, I mean, as part of my studies there, I'd done anthropology, and I had this idea of participant observation as kind of joining a culture and trying to see the world through the eyes of those who were actively involved in it. And I approached it with a kind of very youthful evangelical zeal to really understand the complexity of a culture, and not simply to ask questions of participants, but to try and understand how their representations of reality matched with what I saw with my own eyes. So I observed illegal trading, I observed bouncers and private security companies and whatever else, and I wanted to see what we could make of that, how we could use that information to really pull back the curtain and submit to the cold light of day a world which, for most people, they would never see or certainly never understand.
And let's get stuck into that. The participant observation, because we often talk about sociologist characteristics being right for the job, as it were. So, did you look the part, Simon? Did you meet the criteria of what we imagine a bouncer to be able to do the research?
Yeah, I suppose so. I was kind of young and fit, and then I would have been like 6'2" and maybe kind of 17 stone, and I'd boxed and all that kind of stuff. And just part of I kind of had all the scripts, the rough and tumble of growing up in a working class neighborhood, and all those issues that one encounters in those environments. And I could get a job. I boxed and I knew people who were working on doors. I knew a couple of people who could get me access to private security companies. So, you know, lots of friends, lots of acquaintances, and used my friendships with those men very, very instrumentally, get them to introduce me to people who could help push things along.
And then if we just build on that methodology a little bit more, was it covert observation? Did you want to remain anonymous? How did you actually approach that?
Well, to be perfectly honest, as I understand it, looking back now, I had a very open attitude towards revealing why I was there. And I didn't go in with a very clear idea of what I was willing to talk about and what I wasn't. I let the situation dictate. People who would help me, the gatekeepers, obviously knew that I was working for a university and I was there to gather research. But I went in there, started the research, and the only real thing that strategy I had with was that I would never lie. So if I was asked, I would always tell the truth. So the covert aspect of the research was simply withholding that information. But as soon as anyone solicited information that would lead to truthful disclosure, I simply told them. And I think this is one of the kind of bursting the bubble here a little bit, but this is not Donald McIntyre. This is not police undercover or any of that stuff. Yeah. These are just men. This is like 20 odd years ago. These are men who were engaging in illegal trading, you know, to get a little bit extra money for themselves and their families. There were gangsters, and there was very serious violence, and there were very lucrative criminal markets operating in that world. But most of the people I encountered really couldn't care too much about who was there, who was observing. Police investigations of this kind of cultural environment were still in their infancy. There was no consideration of wiretaps or, you know, grasses hadn't been used in any major criminal cases up where I was doing the research. And people really didn't care too much whether you watched them buying and selling fake Ralph Lauren shirts or, you know, counterfeit perfume and whatever else. They really didn't care too much who was watching. And because I had people to vouch for me, I was just a face in a crowd in most cases, and I could cultivate friendships. And no one really asked what I was doing there. And the occasions where they did ask why I was there, I told them the truth.
Yeah.
And sometimes they loved it, you know, that, you know, guy's going to write a book about this, you know, and they thought it was funny and everything else. And it's possible that some people clammed up around me. I didn't really see it, and there's no way of knowing. But I didn't want to get caught in a lie.
Yeah.
And obviously I didn't want to go through begin my project with that kind of moral failure of kind of manipulating people.
Yeah. Was there anything ethically that you think was perhaps on dodgy ground, or do you think you were always open, no deception, safety, harm, those sort of issues?
Well, you've opened up a whole can of worms there, because I have to ask the academic question is, what do you mean by ethics? Whose ethics? Which ethical system are you talking about? I certainly don't have a great deal of respect for the dominant ethics of research practice as it is understood in the contemporary university, which is basically make sure that you protect the university from litigation. You know, totally disinterested in that, and the obsession with, for example, accumulating consent forms just seems nuts to me. Just seems a complete waste of time and an abdication of our ethical duty to our research subjects, rather than some kind of ethical get out of jail free card, or the kind of top quality research studies always have the comprehensive forms filled in triplicate and whatever else. I don't go along with that. I think ethical research involves acting ethically. It involves treating people with respect and humility, and engaging with them honestly. And I think you don't need a form to do that kind of thing.
I like that answer. I like that answer. That's great. What about moving perhaps away from ethics then, but practically, what were the kind of obstacles that you really faced with the research practically?
Well, I mean, the obvious one is, especially with regard to the bouncer side of this subject, I was employed as a bouncer. So I had to do the job. That you can't just stand there and say, well, actually, I'm an academic, so in this case, I'm not going to get involved. And so I was, whenever there was a violent incident or when there was any incident that needed the attendance of bouncers at any of the pubs or nightclubs I worked at, I was present and involved. So I dragged lots of people out. I threw them roughly. I had punches aimed at me. All kinds of things, just the usual stuff of I interrupted a couple having sex in the corner. I threw out people who were urinating on a gambling machine. All kinds of stuff. Jesus, it was just these were kind of very wild environments where everyone was crammed in. These places really were. I don't think there was much attention paid to all the crowding in these bars and nightclubs, and everyone was pissed. And so they were dangerous, edgy environments. And when you're working as a bouncer in a place like that, you've got to keep order as best you can. And that's certainly what I did.
I mean, what you've just described there is, and I think this is why your research is so famous and used throughout sort of A-level sociology, is you're describing the classic ethnographic research, getting stuck in, being involved. For the students listening, do you mind just describing what you interpret or what you mean by ethnographic research?
Yeah, it means actually getting involved. I prefer the term participant observation because it suggests you're actually participating in the research culture, and that is what makes this particular methodology distinct. So I interviewed people as well, and of course, when I interviewed them, it became obvious, I was divulging my actual occupational background, and there was all that mixed in with it. But I actually did the job, and because I did the job, I saw the problems that my colleagues had to deal with on any given night. I saw up close and personal who the cast of characters were. We had gangsters coming in. There was suggestions of protection rackets and things like that. But you also got lots of drunken teenagers trying to sneak in. You've got older people, some of whom may be carrying knives. All of that, the kind of the job as it's understood by the people involved doing it. You get a kind of really a kind of up close and personal understanding of the problems they have to deal with and how they respond and why they respond in the ways that they respond.
And talking about those problems, the word that keeps on coming up over and over again is the word alcohol. Is the word alcohol. I mean, this might sound really obvious to put it this way, but is that the root cause that we're seeing behind this violence, this outbreak of antisocial behaviour?
No, it's always more complicated than that.
Yeah.
I think the first thing to say is that the nighttime economy today has shrunken significantly from when we were doing the research, and younger people are now less attached to alcohol as a drug of choice, and also less interested in inebriation, generally speaking. It seems. I think it's trying to grasp how cultures have changed, and lots of young people at the turn of the century would rush towards adulthood in a way that young people today tend not to quite the same degree. They wanted to grow up quickly. They wanted to leave the parental home, establish themselves as adults, choose for themselves. And part of that was the traditional way to do that was to get pissed with your friends and to kind of to act out in ways that were in your normal everyday life, disallowed. So alcohol gave you the opportunity to talk to men or women that you normally wouldn't be able to kind of summon up the courage to talk to them. Alcohol was the opportunity to dance around like an idiot in ways that you never would think, to behave in ways that were off the radar. And that's what the nighttime economy was. It encouraged, it invited people to ditch their normal persona, to set aside their usual rules of behavior, and engage in this kind of hedonistic, alcohol-fueled environment, which for a lot of people, at least going through it for the first time, was just incredible fun and really quite liberating.
Because I was really interested, you mentioned right at the start about the rave scene. I just wondered if there was this change, because, you know, late 80s, 90s, you kind of had the rave scene where, let's be honest, the drug of choice was not alcohol, it was ecstasy. And many people said the problems and the fighting reduced then. And then by the late 90s, I guess, you get that real lad culture, drinking culture, even sort of ladette culture. Was there kind of almost like a peak of alcohol consumption around that time?
I think it remained fairly steady over, if we look back at the 20th century, but the ways in which alcohol was consumed changed significantly. So the major shift, especially the growth of nighttime economy, is a shift from the local boozer to city centre drinking strips where people would imbibe alcohol in a very different way. So people got pissed in the 60s and 70s, and there were dance halls and whatever else and venue places that they could go to, but a lot of it was done in situ. So they go to a pub and they'd sit and drink and get drunk in that one place. But the place where we were doing the research, it produced these kind of drinking strips where people would have one drink in one venue and then move on to the next. And that kind of environment changed drinking practices quite considerably. I'm not sure. I think there was probably an increase. And as you say, the rave culture kind of, for some people at least, it kind of suppressed alcohol consumption, at least for a little bit. But it's strange. I don't think, during the 1990s, there may have been an upturn, but I think alcohol has always been a fairly significant feature of working class popular culture. Going back, more than 100 years, it's a part of, especially part of British culture, part of how we do leisure, part of how we kind of come together in community settings, how we get over difficulty in our lives, how we rush towards pleasure in our lives, how men negotiate friendship. It's often very difficult. It certainly was very difficult at the time of the research to have any kind of contact with friends that wasn't in a sporting capacity or didn't involve alcohol in some respect. It lubricated those difficult interactions, and it had a function, a greatly appreciated function in common culture.
And if we could move on a bit more about your findings, then I know this is very difficult to condense a whole study into a small amount, but was there kind of a classic story of the average person that became a bouncer in terms of background, ethnicity, upbringing?
Well, where I did the research principally is certainly was then and still is now dominated by the white working class. So all of the bouncers, not all, there were some ethnic minority bouncers who worked for the security company that I worked for, but overwhelmingly big white working class men, and the overwhelming audience, the people coming into the bars and clubs and whatever else, they were also working class. This research was done in working class cities. In order to get a job, you had to, this is not a job that you would want to do if you didn't think you were capable of carrying it out. At the time, things were a little bit wilder than they are now. They were less regulated. There was a broad awareness that you would face violence if you took a job as a bouncer. And if you're going to take that job, you better be ready to face it head on. Nobody wanted you there if you were just going to kind of roll up and curl up in a ball when faced with, all the problems that bouncers have to engage with on any busy night. So I guess it's the willingness to give it a go that is the real key. But obviously that in order to give it a go, you have to have a sense of confidence when it comes to kind of physical aggression. You have to have a kind of general sense that lots of people will, challenge you verbally and then go no further. And so it's just about being, not falling to pieces in the face of violence, being able to, there were plenty of bouncers who would become violent if they were faced with violence. But most of the bouncers I worked with would kind of shrug it off and they were comfortable with it. They didn't start crying. They didn't run away. They weren't incredibly nervous or anything like that. It was just part of their life, and they were confident in dealing with people, especially drunken people. One of the obvious things with alcohol consumption and violence is your confidence tends to go when you've imbibed alcohol, but your ability to carry it out goes downhill rapidly. And all of the guys I worked with, lots of them were working out regularly in gyms. Some had come from boxing, but most were just kind of gyms. There was an element of UFC, which was just starting to creep in at the time. And they were confident. Some had established reputations for violence, come from local communities, come from, in some cases, criminal families. And they were, had a degree of confidence in their bodily ability to face down these challenges that they would face. So this is the kind of people that we're talking about. Often, nice, moral, family men, occasionally trading in the illegal economy. There was lots of kind of, everyone had a kind of side hustle, as it's called now, going on. Some were importing cigarettes and alcohol, which was common at the time. Lots of trading in fake designer goods, lots of trading in counterfeits. And of course, as the research progressed, just a massive amount of drug dealing, some of which was really quite small, hand-to-hand stuff. But some of the people involved in the research were certainly trading at a level above the street.
Yeah, I did wonder, you said about confidence and so on. I wondered how much of it was about status, masculinity, those sort of terms that we use in sociology.
Well, I certainly wouldn't want to bandy around that phrase toxic masculinity, which really kind of is just a grotesque simplification of how and why people behave. It kind of takes a phrase which is antagonistic to any reasonable sociologist who wants to look at nuance and complexity rather than simply denigrate particular forms of behavior that they don't like rather than seeking to understand them. So I don't think that had anything really to do with the study. I think there was a form of robust masculinity which is rooted in working class culture and goes back through the Industrial Revolution and back into the mists of history, which, there were working class men were bred with that kind of sense of stoicism, desire for autonomy. And these characteristics found an outlet in this particular new context, very old characteristics in the new context. So they were just kind of, you wouldn't be, they looked as if they could handle themselves because they'd been around violence a lot in their lives. They were confident in the face of it. They were generally bigger than the average man. They worked out a lot more, so they had more muscle. And some of them boxed and were very good with their hands. Some of them were on UFC and they were, judo enthusiasts, wrestling enthusiasts. Quite a broad gamut. But they were all kind of men who were bodily quite confident in their ability to face down challenges. In terms of masculinity, obviously they're men, and they're enacting particular scripts around masculinity. But I don't think there was anything particularly negativistic. There was elements of sexism, which were far more common then. So they would, they would comment on women passing in the street and things of that kind. But they were also subject to sexual assault themselves, and they would laugh about it. I mean, really, they were grabbed and manhandled by women all the time. And I can remember a group of male strippers who were working at this bar, this kind of disco bar with a capacity about like 1,000 people were in there. And they had male strippers on. And one of the jobs for the bouncers to keep order in this very difficult environment was to get the strippers from the manager's office, which is where they got changed, onto the dance floor, which is where they did the act. And this was incredibly difficult. And these strippers, these poor guys, Jesus Christ, they were sexually assaulted. It was impossible to keep them safe between the two places, and they were grabbed and whatever else, and the bouncers were also grabbed. But because of their cultural background, they kind of shrugged all that stuff off. They didn't start crying about being the victim of a sexual assault. So these are quite old-fashioned cultures. A lot of the discourse we have about inappropriate sexual talk, inappropriate interactions between men and women, it was all there, but it was often going in both directions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wonder even if that word would have been used. Would they have even considered that they had been sexually assaulted at that time?
That's just arse grabbing, and mostly, they'd kind of shrug it off, and they'd make a joke about it.
Yeah.
In some cases, they would consider it a sign of flattery. It was all comedy to them, and they'd make light of that kind of thing.
Yeah, I just made a note of the term robust masculinity. I've not heard that one before. I like it. Simon, I just wanted to ask you. You just mentioned an event there, but I wondered if there was any other events or perhaps individuals that really stand out from that piece of research that kind of really stick in your mind.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you about the hardest thing that I had to deal with. I was working at a bar. It was actually quite a way away from where the majority of the research was conducted, and I was working with a friend of mine, and we travelled down to work the door, and there was just the two of us working on this. Wasn't a particularly loud pub. It was in the city centre. Didn't have a lot of music on. It wasn't particularly orientated towards younger drinkers, and it was quite an easy gig, really. A bit boring, not much going on. So we were watching the street traffic as people trailed up and down, going about their business. Lots of people out after dark in the city centre, and a crowd had gathered just outside the bar that we were working, and girls were arguing, and raised voices attracted a crowd, and people kind of stopped going about their business and started to watch what was unfolding. And we kind of had a kind of ringside seat almost as we looked out from our place at the door to the pub onto the main street. And an argument, there was two antagonists shouting at each other. And, there was all that kind of being, from the crowd, making noise, trying to, seem shocked by what was happening. And the argument stopped, and one of the girls turned away, and it seemed as though it was all over, but she picked up a bottle, a brown empty alcohol bottle that was on the curbside, and turned around immediately and smashed off the girl who she was arguing in the face with it. And this changed the atmosphere immediately on the street. It was a terrible act of violence. Just the sound, everyone made a kind of intake of breath. This was obviously a very serious act of violence from the moment the blow was delivered. And so we'd rushed out from our place to kind of catch this girl, who immediately had her hand clutched to her mouth, and caught her and kind of brought her into the pub. And the guy I was working with had first aid skills and kind of gradually persuaded the girl to let her hand come away from her mouth. And it was just the most awful injury. Ripped from nostril to mouth, teeth missing. She was still fully conscious and wasn't crying, was just shocked, and hadn't really come round from the shock of the incident. And the police were there quite quickly. I agreed to give a statement, which is unusual. It was the only time that I agreed to give a statement to police, and that was just reflected my own cultural background, because if this had been a man, I probably wouldn't have done that. And because I was so shocked by what had happened, I wanted to do all I could to help the police in this incident. And it turned out this girl was 15 years old. And the case didn't actually come to court, so I didn't have to do anything really apart from give a statement. Police came around a couple of nights later and told us the facts of the matter, and I lost sleep over that.
Yeah.
That was that returned to me quite a few times, and it prompted quite a lot of rumination around ethics. And could I have intervened sooner? Is there anything I should have done differently? And this is real ethics, I think, not filling in a consent form. It's trying to work out how one can assist one's fellow human beings rather than how one can satisfy a kind of committee sitting in a university lecture theatre.
Was that a point where you stepped away from it? I mean, we often talk about getting into a group, but walking away from that study, was there a particular moment when that happened?
I don't think I continued to work after that. The real end point came when I was working with a security company that was also involved in protection rackets, and they got called out. We got called out. I was in a nightclub after the fact, after finishing work at a pub, and we all got in cars and flew out to this pub, which was on the edge of town, and the head of the security company kind of attacked this guy who he believed was responsible for smashing up this pub that he was supposed to be protecting. And then the other guys that I was working with kind of joined in, and he was getting hoofed around the floor, this young guy. And I'd shouted immediately, stop. Because how could you not, right? I mean, these are big guys, powerful guys, and there was every opportunity that this could have been a fatality. So I had to intervene at that point, and I did intervene and told them to stop, and they did stop. But from that point onwards, it became clear to me that to continue on with that kind of stuff was unsustainable, and it was best at that point. We had more than enough data to write the book at that stage, and I kind of backtracked a little, and exiting was far harder than entering the field. But that was the end point for me.
This is going to sound a bizarre question based on the last two stories you just told, but did you enjoy it, Simon? Did you enjoy the work?
There were moments of fun. Like some of the guys I worked with were really good company, and they'd make great jokes, and I'd spend a lot of time, 4-hour shift or whatever it was, just laughing, right? Just great fun. I was still a young guy at the time. It was a nice environment to spend time in. I didn't enjoy the violence at all, and some of the professional criminals that I spent time with were pretty good company, and I enjoyed that aspect. But it's I think this is the thing, a kind of research project you do on the weekend, but this was like a full time. This was my life for kind of the best part of the year, and then there were interviews and whatever else that stretched it out to around 2 years of worth of research. And so it's like if you look back on your youth, there will be high points and down points, and points of regret, and points that you return to as you get nostalgic, all the rest of that kind of stuff. So it's just I've integrated all of that into my biography, and I'm content that I did a good job, that the research that we conducted was worthwhile, and we extended knowledge, which was the reason why we did it in the first place. I think I did reveal some important truths about how people live and how illegal markets are organized, and the role of violence in those markets. And I'm quite kind of quietly confident that I did my part in contributing to the development of our intellectual life and our disciplines.
Definitely, definitely. And in that respect, if listeners want to find out more about the research, how can they find out more about the study?
Well, there are 2 books. You should be able to get them at any college, university, library. You'll get them for very cheaply on Amazon these days because they're quite old books. But the book that I wrote is called Bad Fellas, and the book I wrote with Dick Hobbs, Stuart Lister, and Phil Hadfield is called Bouncers.
And yeah, is there what are you working on at the moment, Simon? What's your current research?
I've just written a book about nostalgia and how people experience nostalgia and the role of nostalgia in developing forms of working class politics. I'm especially interested in how people on the far right utilize nostalgic imagery in formulating their politics.
Thank you. And if people want to find out more about you, can they follow you on X or Instagram?
I think I'm on Twitter. I don't tweet much, but whatever it is, X now. You can get me posting a few things that I've read and think were interesting. So please do.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your time, Simon. I really, really appreciate it.
Lovely. Thanks. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.